ServiceNow DB integration. So I kind of talk through what we're doing today, and then I think this afternoon, and you guys will probably get sick of seeing me today because I'm presenting on a couple other topics this afternoon. You'll see some new and more innovative ways that we're using DB and alert data within
Could never get sick of you,
ServiceNow
Brian.
as well. Well, at least I don't have to look at myself while I'm doing slides. Okay, so just kind of the basics on ServiceNow. And so I'm really kind of looking at this from the ServiceNow. How do we get data in? How do we get data out? And what are the methods available to us? So they've got what they call import sets. I'd refer to that as sort of your bulk import. And we do leverage that. I'll talk a little bit about that here in just a minute. And then for more sort of real-time integrations, they've got built-in capabilities for using REST-based web services. So both inbound, and you can talk through their table API, you can build custom REST APIs on top of ServiceNow, and basically, standard REST returning JSON. And in addition to that, we can configure what they call outbound REST APIs, and that allows us to talk to many of our other GlobalNOC tools from within ServiceNow in a real-time kind of fashion. So stop me if you have any questions along the way. I'm going to go ahead and drill into each of these just a little bit more. Okay, so when would we want to use the sort of bulk import function? So if we're dealing with a really large set of data that needs to be uploaded into ServiceNow sort of on a regular interval, that's the kind of thing that you would want to look at the bulk import for. So we can point this at, say, for example, a large CSV file. It can fetch that basically, then it'll run an importer, and then it lets us transform that data, which has been staged, and then load it into rows in the ServiceNow database. So we do this today. We do this for user data, contact data, POP data, entity data, and all of those get loaded at different intervals. I think the user data is maybe every 30 minutes, and I think the contact, POP, and entity data is maybe once a day. We're loading the contacts from all of the different GlobalNOC DB instances, so it ends up being quite a large data set. All the entities and those kind of things. It's not the kind of thing where we would want to sit and loop and do one REST API transaction for each row. So this is a much more efficient if we're dealing at basically bringing in data from a source of truth into ServiceNow. And so our source of truth for the contact data, user data, POP data, entity data, that's all within our GlobalNOC DB instances. So we load that data into ServiceNow, and that then becomes available for us to reference inside of ServiceNow. Any questions on bulk import before I move to the next? Pretty straightforward. I think most tools, do that kind of thing. Okay. The next one, inbound web services, really is much more useful when you're dealing with, one, maybe a few hundred records that you want to fetch, or, a record that you want to insert, that kind of thing. So this approach basically uses a ServiceNow account to establish a connection to either the table API, which is provided by ServiceNow and kind of lets you have access to the tables behind the scenes, um, or we can write our custom inbound handlers, and that lets us do intelligence adding on top of just reading rows from a table. So if we wanted to combine, different data sets and then return some JSON response that combined those, we could write that ourselves. So just a few examples that we are actually using this for to give you an idea. We all have the different request forms that we've built out, and we've got some active projects around that. Those actually are generating requests, which I should have looked at the spelling there. Bad, Brian. And the requests then generate records inside of ServiceNow, which are the request items, which spawn our service request based workflows, right? So we're taking information that people are filling on our web form, and we're essentially pumping that in through the REST API into ServiceNow, which then spawns the appropriate request item and kicks off the workflow for that particular request. So another one that I'll be touching on this afternoon, in hopefully a really good way, and this will go away, the change form today that all of you have to use, and I think mostly don't like, is a fair statement. And that will actually insert a change record and kick off the change workflow process inside of ServiceNow for us, right? So that's just another example where we're basically using the REST API doing inserts. And here's a read example. So the operations calendar, we can go to that and we can read the incident and change data, certain parts of the incident and change data, and basically populate that calendar dynamically from fetching that data through the ServiceNow REST API. Any questions on the inbound? Okay. So the last one, which we have just started exploring more recently, um, we can use outbound web services. And what this lets us do is invoke web services from inside of ServiceNow to tools outside of ServiceNow, like the GlobalNOC database, AlertMon, Network Impact Tool, those kinds of things, and I'll reference that later today in some of the presentations that we're doing. So when is this good? We need real-time data, right? So this is a real-time call to another system, but we've got to be dealing with somewhat limited set of rows. You wouldn't use this to load a whole data set, because basically the user is going to sit there and wait after they click a button for who knows how long, right? Because this is generally synchronous events within the user's workflow. So what this does is we use a target web service provider, and that could be our database, could be AlertMon, could be NIT. I think we use all three of those in some of the examples I'll be showing this afternoon. And we establish the connection, and basically we have to do some custom coding, but it gives us real-time synchronous interaction with other systems. So if we want to go look up, say, circuit data, we can do that from ServiceNow using the real-time outbound web service. So just a few examples to make that a little bit more real. So communicating with AlertMon to gather additional information about alarms that have been hacked to a given ticket. And we will actually get into an example of that this afternoon. Communicating with the GlobalNOC DB to find information related to an alarm. And that's another case that we'll look at this afternoon as well. And communicating with X external system to bring data or decision variables back into ServiceNow. So what I'm trying to say with that last one is it really doesn't matter as long as the system that we're trying to interact with has a REST API. It's very easy for us to hook up and connect with that from inside of ServiceNow. So we've got experience with import APIs. We've had to do that before we could even go live. We had to stage all of our data from our DBs, get all of our users in there, our contacts, so that we could get our ticket data right. We had to play around with inbound REST APIs. We've done this with the table API, and we've done it with custom built REST APIs as well. And we are now building up experience with outbound REST APIs. So, what are some of the advantages? Really, all of these different ways allow for fairly quick system integration. And we can handle the different scenarios. If we need to load a bunch of data, we could probably use the bulk API. If we need to, integrate something inbound, we can do that. If we need to integrate something outbound, we can do that. And that can be more your sort of real-time scenarios. I think it's always, wise to, just add our disclaimers. We are all living in a shared ServiceNow instance. So, if some API says, "Hey, give me all your data, ServiceNow," that's going to consume a large amount of resources, right? So we do try to be very careful with where we use the API, and try to scope it such that it's not going to, affect any of our customers, right? So that's just sort of the disclaimer. So that's really ServiceNow integration. I touched more than just on the DB, but that's because we can integrate with more than just the DB. Any questions at this time?
Yeah, just to highlight our primary goal of this lightning talk, we've heard from a few different customers that they would be interested in having more integration with the DB. So Brian's explanation was if you are interested in doing some sort of integration between ServiceNow and your database, please reach out to us. There's so many options, so many things that we could do with this data that we need a place to start. And so if you provide us with your requirements, that'll at least give us some direction on some things that we can tackle.
Yeah, thanks, Corey, for the additional clarity there.